Hello, my dear listeners. Please write in the comments which city or country you are listening to us from, and don't forget to subscribe and like. Enjoy the listening. It all started an hour ago when Katerina walked into the Iron Dragon Martial Arts Academy in Portland to pick up her 17-year-old daughter, Zoya. An ordinary Thursday, an ordinary day in the life of a single mother who worked as a graphic designer and barely made ends meet after her divorce 3 years ago. Zoya had been practicing karate for 2 years, and these classes were the only luxury that Katerina could afford. Every month she saved a few dollars, denying herself coffee and lunches so her daughter could train. Because she had seen how martial arts helped Zoya gain confidence after her father left for his secretary, abandoning them without a penny. "Mom, you came!" Zoya waved to her from the other side of the hall, where she was practicing kata with a group of teenagers. Her face was glowing with exhaustion and pleasure. These classes were her salvation after the disaster that Richard Hamilton had caused in their lives. Katerina sat on a bench against the wall, took out her phone, and tried to focus on work emails. But her attention was constantly distracted by the sharp, authoritative voice of the head instructor. Jason Sterling was exactly the type of man who instinctively repulsed her. Tall, muscular, with perfectly styled hair and a black belt that he wore like a crown. There were notes of sadism in his voice as he corrected the students' mistakes. "Your stance is disgusting, Connor," he barked at a 14-year-old boy. "My grandmother in a wheelchair holds her stance better. Do it again, and if I see one more mistake, you'll be doing push-ups until midnight." Several parents exchanged worried glances, but no one dared to intervene. The dojo had an impeccable reputation. Many of Jason's students became champions in regional tournaments. Parents were willing to tolerate his harsh methods for the sake of results. But Katerina saw the difference between strict discipline and psychological terror. She had spent years in a dojo. She knew what real training looked like, and this was just a demonstration of power over those who could not fight back. "Sensei Jason is really tough," one mom whispered to another, "but he gets results. My son reached a brown belt in 6 months. He definitely knows how to command," the second one replied, nervously glancing at how Jason was correcting another student's stance with excessive force, "although sometimes I feel like he crosses the line." Katerina gritted her teeth, watching what was happening. Jason's movements had technique, that was undeniable. But his approach to teaching lacked the main component of martial arts, respect. Respect for the students, for the art, for the very philosophy that underpinned it all. 20 minutes later, Zoya ran up to her, wiping sweat from her face with a towel. "Ready to go, Mom? I just need to grab my water bottle." "Of course, dear. How was training?" "Not bad. Sensei Jason showed us new combinations. He says I can try for my green belt next month." Katerina's heart swelled with pride. Zoya had struggled with self-doubt after the divorce, and seeing her daughter grow stronger from within was worth every dollar spent. As they gathered Zoya's things, Jason's voice cut through the general noise again. "All right, everyone. Before we finish, who wants to see something interesting?" Silence fell over the hall. All eyes turned to the instructor. Katerina felt a knot of anxiety tighten in her stomach. Jason's gaze slowly swept the room before landing on her. A slow, predatory smile spread across his face. "You know what? I think we need a demonstration of why ordinary people shouldn't mess with real fighters." Several students exchanged worried glances. This was not part of their usual program. "Mom, let's just leave," whispered Zoya, tugging at Katerina's sleeve. But Jason was not finished yet. He crossed the mat with feigned confidence, his steps echoing in the suddenly tense atmosphere. Other parents shifted uncomfortably, unsure whether this was part of some planned lesson or something entirely different. Katerina slowly stood up, her maternal instincts on high alert. Whatever Jason was planning, she felt it would not end well. Jason stopped right in front of Katerina, his 6'2" frame towering over her modest 5'5". The entire dojo fell into an eerie silence. Even the teenagers who had been giggling moments ago now stared in awkward silence. "Ma'am," Jason said loudly, making sure everyone could hear, "I don't think we've had the pleasure of meeting. You're Zoya's mom, right?" "That's correct," Katerina replied in a steady voice, despite the tension crackling in the air. Jason's smile widened, but there was no warmth in it. Well, since you're here watching our training, I'm curious, have you ever been interested in martial arts? Katerina felt Zoya's hand slip into hers, damp with nervous sweat. Not particularly, she answered honestly. Come on, don't be modest, Jason continued, his tone becoming increasingly theatrical as he played to the audience. I bet you've watched all those action movies and thought, I could do that too, right? Most people do. A few nervous chuckles rolled through the room. Katerina noticed several parents looking away, clearly uncomfortable with where this was heading. Actually, no, Katerina said, maintaining her composure. We should probably head home. Zoya has homework. But Jason was not about to end his show. He took another step closer, his voice lowering just enough to sound conversational, but still carrying to every corner of the room. You know what? I have an idea. How about a little friendly demonstration? Nothing serious, just a quick sparring match to show everyone the difference between real training and, well, good intentions. Blood drained from Zoya's face. Sensei Jason, my mom doesn't... It's all right, dear, Katerina quietly interrupted her, though her jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. Jason clapped his hands, the sharp sound making several people jump. Great! Don't worry, Mrs. Hamilton. I'll be gentle with you. Wouldn't want to hurt someone who's never thrown a proper punch. The condescension in his voice was blatant. Now Katerina could see the other students, some looking embarrassed by their instructor's behavior, others excited by the prospect of entertainment. The other parents seemed torn between the desire to intervene and the reluctance to engage in what was happening. This really isn't necessary, Katerina said, her voice still calm. Oh, but it is, Jason insisted, spreading his arms wide. You see, too many people these days think they're tough because of what they see on TV. It's important to understand the reality of real combat training versus suburban mom fitness. The insult hung in the air like smoke. Katerina felt something shift in her chest. Not exactly anger, but a familiar coldness she hadn't felt in years. Besides, Jason continued, now clearly enjoying himself, what's the worst that could happen? A few soft techniques, maybe a couple of throws. Consider it a free lesson in humility. Mixed reactions rippled through the room. Some students looked shocked by their instructor's behavior. Others seemed caught up in the drama. The other parents appeared torn between outrage and the unwillingness to intervene. Katerina looked down at Zoya, whose eyes were wide with worry and shame. Then she looked at Jason again, whose self-satisfied expression indicated that he was already savoring his inevitable victory. One condition, Katerina said quietly. Jason raised an eyebrow. Oh, and what would that be? Nasonim. When this is over, you will apologize to your students for this spectacle. Jason's laughter echoed through the dojo, sharp and mocking. Apologize? Lady, you'll be the one apologizing to the floor when you hit it. A few students winced at their instructor's cruelty, but Katerina's expression did not change. She simply nodded and began to remove her jacket, revealing her slender, well-developed arms that spoke of years of disciplined training. Mom, Zoe whispered urgently, you don't have to do this. Katerina gently squeezed her daughter's hand. Sometimes, dear, bullies need to be reminded that strength comes in many forms. As Katerina made her way to the center of the tatami, her gait suddenly changed. The shuffling walk of a tired suburban mom melted away, replaced by the smooth, measured steps of someone who understood combat on an intimate level. Jason, busy adjusting his belt and playing to the crowd, completely missed the transformation. All right, folks, gather around. Let's make this educational. What Jason didn't know, what no one in that room knew, was that Katerina Hamilton was once Cat Shadow Chen, a 3-time world champion in mixed martial arts. For 6 years, she dominated competitions in multiple weight classes, earning the nickname Shadow for her calm demeanor and devastating technique. She abruptly retired at 25, not due to injury or defeat, but because of tragedy. Her younger brother, also a fighter, died in a car accident while rushing to one of her matches. The guilt was overwhelming. If she hadn't been competing, he wouldn't have been on that road that night. Katerina walked away from it all. Titles, sponsorships, the life she had built. She changed her name back to her mother's maiden name, moved across the country, and vowed never to fight again. For 13 years, she kept that promise, channeling her energy into raising Zoe and creating a quiet life as a graphic designer. But now watching Jason's self-satisfied face as he explained to his students how real fighters deal with imposters, Katarina felt the old fire ignite, not for glory or competition, but for something more important: respect. "Ready, Mrs. Hamilton?" Jason called, bouncing lightly on his toes in what he likely considered an intimidating display. Katarina took her position at the center of the tatami, her breathing becoming deeper and more controlled. The observing crowd around her grew quieter, sensing something they couldn't quite identify. "Just remember," Jason announced to his audience, "this is why we train seriously. Experience can't be faked." The irony of his words was not lost on Katarina. She had faced Olympic champions, professional fighters, and martial arts masters who had dedicated their entire lives to perfection. Jason, with all his arrogance, was about to learn what real experience looked like. "Do you have any last words before we begin?" Jason asked, his tone dripping with false politeness. For the first time since this challenge began, Katarina looked directly into his eyes. What Jason saw there made him involuntarily take a step back. Not fear or uncertainty, but a cold, calculating gaze of a predator playing the victim. "Yes," Katarina said quietly, her voice clearly resonating through the silent dojo. "You should remember that the strongest people are often those who choose not to show their strength." Jason's confident smirk wavered slightly, but his pride wouldn't allow him to back down now. "Well then," Jason said, shaking off the momentary uncertainty, "let's end this." He began to stretch ostentatiously, executing high kicks and complex warm-up exercises, clearly intended to intimidate. The other students watched with a mix of excitement and anxiety, while the parents appeared increasingly uncomfortable with the whole situation. Meanwhile, Katarina stood completely still in the center of the tatami. Her breathing became deep and rhythmic, and the few people who knew what to look for could notice a subtle change in her stance. A slight lowering of her center of gravity, the way her weight evenly distributed across both legs. "Mom, please," Zoe whispered from the sidelines. "You have nothing to prove." Katarina turned to her daughter with a gentle smile. "Sometimes, dear, it's not about proving something, it's about teaching a lesson." Jason finished his warm-up with flair, throwing a series of airstrikes that whistled through the silence. "I hope you prayed, Mrs. Hamilton. This might hurt a little." A few parents exchanged worried glances across the hall. This had gone far beyond a simple demonstration. Jason's behavior was becoming genuinely alarming. "Maybe we should stop this?" one father whispered to another. "How? He's the instructor. Besides, she agreed to this." Katarina could hear the whispers, but paid them no mind. Instead, she briefly closed her eyes, allowing muscle memory to surface. Her body remembered everything: countless hours of training, the precise timing of counterattacks, the feeling of an opponent's energy, and how to redirect it. When she opened her eyes, something fundamental had changed. The tired suburban mom had vanished, replaced by someone who moved with predatory grace. Jason noticed the transformation and frowned. "You've been hiding something from us, haven't you? Taken a few self-defense classes at the community center?" "Something like that," Katarina replied quietly. "Well, it doesn't matter. A little weekend warrior training won't help you here." Jason began to circle her slowly, still playing to his audience. "You see, kids, this is what happens when people overestimate their abilities. Real fighting isn't like the movies. You can't just watch a few videos and think you're ready for reality." Katarina remained still in the center, only turning her head to track his movement. To the untrained eye, she looked passive, almost defenseless. But to anyone who understood fighting, her stillness was unsettling, like a coiled spring waiting for the right moment to release. "The thing about martial arts," Jason continued his lecture circling, "is that it takes years to develop real skill. You can't just watch a few videos and think you're ready for the real deal." "You are absolutely right," Katarina agreed, her voice carrying a strange note that made several people look at her more closely. Jason halted his circling, clearly surprised by her agreement. "Exactly. So maybe we should just stop this before—" "No," Katarina gently interrupted. "You wanted to teach a lesson about real martial arts. Let's teach it." The confidence in her voice sent a wave of unease through the hall. Even Jason seemed to sense that something had changed, though his pride wouldn't allow him to back down. "Fine," he said, taking what he likely considered a menacing fighting stance. "But don't say I didn't warn you." Jason lunged forward with a training right cross, the type of attack he had probably successfully used against countless beginners. He was fast, technically proficient, and delivered with the full weight of his considerable frame behind it. He didn't come close to landing a hit. Katerina moved like water flowing around a stone. She stepped aside at the precise moment, her body leaning just enough for Jason's strike to slice through the empty air where her head had been a fraction of a second ago. The movement was so subtle, so economical, that several observers weren't even sure she was moving at all. Jason stumbled slightly, his momentum carrying him past his intended target. His eyes widened in confusion. That strike was supposed to land. He had successfully used it hundreds of times before. "Lucky dodge," he muttered, regaining his stance. "Not twice." Katerina said nothing, simply returning to her central position and waiting. This time, Jason tried a combination: jab, cross, hook. Each punch was technically sound, thrown with the confidence of someone who had never been seriously challenged. Each strike found only air. Katerina moved like smoke, her head slipping away from the punches by mere millimeters, her body swaying out of reach with a fluidity that was almost hypnotic to watch. She never looked rushed, never seemed off balance. It was as if she could see each attack seconds before Jason himself knew he was going to throw it. The atmosphere in the hall had changed dramatically. The excited chatter had completely died down, replaced by an electric tension that made everyone hold their breath. Even the youngest students could feel they were witnessing something extraordinary. Jason's confidence began to crack. Sweat beaded on his forehead as he realized that none of his attacks had come close to hitting the target. "Stand still and fight," he growled, launching into a more aggressive series of strikes. Katerina continued her ethereal dance, avoiding each attempt with minimal effort. But now something else was happening. She was moving closer with each dodge, subtly closing the distance while Jason exhausted himself, throwing increasingly desperate attacks. "What is she doing?" whispered one of the teenage students. "She's tiring him out," another noted more perceptively. Jason threw a wild haymaker, putting everything he had into it. Katerina ducked smoothly beneath him, and for the first time made contact. Just a light touch to his exposed ribs as he flew past her. The touch was so gentle it could not have harmed a child, but it sent a clear message. "I could hurt you here, but I chose not to." Jason spun around, his face flushed with exertion and rising panic. "What games are you playing?" "Resist." "I am resisting," Katerina said quietly. "I just choose how." The depth of her statement hung in the air. She was neither fleeing nor yielding. She was demonstrating a level of control that neither of them had ever seen before. Jason, his breath coming in ragged gasps, made one last desperate attempt. He dropped low and lunged forward in an attempt at a takedown, using his wrestling experience to try to bring the fight to the ground, where his size advantage could matter. It was precisely the wrong move against precisely the wrong person. As Jason lunged forward for his takedown attempt, Katerina did something that challenged everything the watching crowd thought they understood about physics and grappling. She did not try to back away or defend against the takedown. Instead, she stepped forward into him. Her movement was so unexpected, so perfectly timed, that Jason's forward momentum worked against him. Katerina's hands found the back of his head and shoulders, and using a technique that looked almost gentle, she directed his energy down and forward, stepping aside. Jason crashed face first into the mat with a deafening thud that echoed through the silent dojo. The hall erupted in gasps and stunned whispers. Jason lay still for a few moments, shocked not only by the impact but by the sheer impossibility of what had just happened. He had been the aggressor. He had all the momentum, and somehow he found himself eating canvas, while his opponent stood calmly over him, not even breathing heavily. "How?" Jason propped himself up on his elbows, looking at Katerina with a mix of confusion and budding respect. Katerina extended her hand to help him up. 13 years of practice before I even stepped into this dojo." Jason ignored the outstretched hand and awkwardly got up by himself, his face burning with shame and wounded pride. Around the hall, his students watched with wide eyes, seeing their seemingly invincible instructor transformed into an embarrassed, humiliated man. "This is impossible," Jason muttered. You're just, you're just a mom, an ordinary person." "No," Katrina said softly but firmly. "I am a person who chose to step away from fighting to focus on what truly mattered, raising my daughter. But that doesn't mean I forgot everything I learned." The truth hit the hall like a wave. This was not some lucky amateur who had landed a few good moves. This was someone operating on a completely different level, someone who had restrained herself so radically that the entire confrontation felt more like a lesson than a fight. Zoya stepped forward, her eyes bright with tears of pride and relief. "Mom was Kat Shadow Chen," she announced to the stunned hall. "A 3-time world champion. She retired when I was little." The silence that followed was deafening. A few older students pulled out their phones, clearly Googling the name. Their expressions shifted from skepticism to awe as they found videos and articles about Katarina's legendary career. Jason's face went through a series of emotions: shock, shame, and finally, something that could have been the beginning of wisdom. He looked around at his students, then back at Katrina. I owe you an apology," he said quietly, "and I owe them one too." He gestured to his students. "That was not teaching, that was bullying." Katerina nodded. "The strongest thing you can do is acknowledge when you're wrong. Your students will respect you for it more, not less." Jason straightened his shoulders and turned to face his class. "Everyone, I made a serious mistake today. I let my ego make decisions that my brain should have made. Mrs. Hamilton showed me what real martial arts look like. Not techniques, but the wisdom to know when and how to use them." But even as Jason spoke, Katerina could see something dark in the depths of his eyes. Something that told her this humiliation would not be forgotten or forgiven. She had seen that look before, in men whose pride had been publicly shattered. Over the next few minutes, the hall slowly emptied, students and parents leaving in excited conversations about what they had just witnessed. A few older students approached Katerina with sincere apologies for their instructor's behavior. "Mrs. Hamilton," said a boy about 16, "can I ask, why did you stop competing?" Katerina glanced at Zoya, who took her hand. "Because I realize there are things more important than winning. Family, love, creating a life that matters beyond the ring." As they gathered Zoya's things and headed for the exit, Jason intercepted them at the door. His face was a mask of controlled fury. "This isn't over," he whispered low enough for only Katrina to hear. "You put me in an awkward position in front of my students. In this town, I have connections, influence. Life can become very difficult for a single mother who doesn't know when to keep her mouth shut." Katerina turned to meet his gaze fully. What he saw there made him take a step back. "Mr. Sterling," she said quietly, 13 years ago, I could have broken every bone in your body without breaking a sweat. Time hasn't changed that. What has changed is that now I have a daughter to protect. If you ever, and I mean ever, try to harm my family, you will find out why I was called the Shadow. And believe me, it's not because of how I moved." Jason paled. The threat in her voice was utterly sincere. "You can't threaten me. I'll call the police. I'm not threatening," Katerina interrupted. "I'm stating a fact. Leave us alone, and we'll leave you alone. Harm us, and you'll find out why I was a world champion while you teach karate to kids in the suburbs." With those words, she took Zoya's hand, and they stepped out into the night. But this story was far from over. When they got into their old Honda, Zoya turned to her mother. "Mom, I had no idea. Why didn't you ever tell me?" Katerina sat in silence for a moment, her hands trembling on the steering wheel as the adrenaline finally began to fade. "Because that part of my life ended the day your Uncle Tommy died," she finally said. "He was rushing to one of my matches when the accident happened. I swore I would never fight again, that I would never let my pride put someone I love in danger." Tears streamed down Zoya's cheeks. "But you fought today." "Not out of pride," Katerina said. "Out of love. To protect you from humiliation. To show you that no one has the right to make you feel small." They drove home in thoughtful silence, each lost in her own thoughts. But neither of them noticed the dark sedan that followed them at a distance, or the man behind the wheel who spoke quietly into his phone. "Yes, that's her," Jason said into the receiver. "Kat Chen. Now she calls herself Katerina Hamilton. Lives on Elm Street with her daughter." A pause. "No, I want this to be elaborate. ruin her, fire her, make it impossible for her to find work in this town. I want her to regret the day she put me in an awkward position." On the other end of the line, a voice laughed. "Happy to oblige, Jason. We have people everywhere. By the end of the week, she'll be begging for forgiveness." But what Jason and his connections didn't know was that the humiliated cat, the Shadow Chen, was far more dangerous than the champion who once dominated the octagon. Because now she had something worth fighting for. And when the termination papers arrived in the morning, when clients began canceling contracts without explanation, when they were asked to vacate their apartment due to lease violations that had never occurred, Katerina realized that this was war. And this time, she wasn't going to back down. The true battle was just beginning, and Jason Sterling had no idea what he was getting into. The shadow was back, and this time she was fighting not for titles or glory. She was fighting for her daughter. And there was nothing on earth more dangerous than a mother protecting her child. The next morning, Katerina woke to the sound of notifications on her phone. 7 missed calls from different clients. Her stomach twisted as she listened to the voicemail messages. "Katerina, this is Marcus from TechFlow Industries. I'm very sorry, but we have to terminate our design contract. We've received information about some professional misconduct on your part. Nothing personal?" The next message was even worse. "Hi, this is Jennifer from Creative Space. We had to make the difficult decision to cancel the entire project. Sorry, but our company's reputation is paramount." By the 8th message, Katerina's hands were shaking. In one night, she had lost 80% of her income. Contracts she had worked on for months had vanished without a trace. "Mom?" Zoya appeared in the kitchen doorway, already dressed for school. "Is everything okay? You look sick." Katerina quickly wiped her tears and forced herself to smile. "Everything's fine, dear. Just work issues. Go have breakfast." But just as Zoya sat down at the table, there was a sharp knock at the door. Katerina opened the door to find a man in an expensive suit holding official documents. "Katerina Hamilton, this is a notice of intent to terminate the lease agreement. You have 30 days to rectify the violations or vacate the premises." "What? This is impossible. We have never violated the lease terms." The man shrugged. "Violation of Clause 12A, engaging in activities that may harm the reputation of the property. If the violations are not rectified within a month, the landlord will be forced to take legal action." Katerina grabbed the documents with trembling hands. The legal jargon was confusing, but the essence was clear. They were being thrown out onto the street. "Mom, what's happening?" Zoya stood up from the table, her breakfast untouched. "Nothing you need to worry about," Katerina lied, but her voice trembled. After the man left, Katerina locked the door and leaned against it with her back. For the first time in 13 years, she felt completely helpless. Jason was not joking about his connections. The phone rang again. It was the lawyer. "Mrs. Hamilton, I am calling regarding the defamation case filed against you by Mr. Jason Sterling. He claims that you physically attacked him in his dojo and damaged his reputation as an instructor." "That's a lie. He challenged me to a fight." "I understand your position, but he has testimonies from several witnesses who claim otherwise. I recommend you find a good lawyer." Katerina hung up and sat on the floor. The world she had so carefully built for Zoya was collapsing around her. 13 years of peaceful life were being destroyed in a single day. "Mom, you're scaring me." Zoya sat down next to her on the floor. "What is really happening?" Katerina looked into her daughter's eyes and saw the fear there that broke her heart. For Zoya, she had always been strong, always found a solution. But now she felt like a 17-year-old girl who had just realized that the world could be a cruel place. That man from the dojo, he is getting revenge on us for what happened yesterday. Sensei Jason? But why? Because his pride was hurt, and because he has power that we do not. Zoya took her mother's hand in hers. "What are we going to do?" It was a question to which Katerina had no answer. They had 3 days to find new housing, but without jobs and income, no one would rent them an apartment. Her savings would cover at most a month of expenses. At school, Zoya's situation was also going downhill. When she arrived in class, several classmates were already whispering something while looking at her. By lunchtime, the rumors had spread throughout the school. "Is it true that your mom beat up a karate teacher?" "저는 asked Madison Pierce, the leader of the school gossipers. My dad says she is mentally unstable and dangerous. That's not true, Zoya replied quietly, but other students were already starting to distance themselves from her. By the end of the day, she was sitting alone in the cafeteria, listening to other kids discuss Zoya's crazy mom. Some teachers also began to look at her differently, with suspicion and caution. When she got home, she found Katerina in the living room, with boxes, packing their things. Mom, do we really have to move? I'm afraid so, dear, but we will find something else. Everything will be okay. But there was no confidence in Katerina's voice, and Zoya could hear it. That night, when Zoya finally fell asleep, Katerina sat at the kitchen table with a calculator and a stack of bills. The math was ruthless. Even if she found a new job tomorrow, they would need at least 3 months to stabilize the situation. And they didn't have 3 months. She looked at the photo on the refrigerator, Zoya at last year's graduation, glowing with happiness. In just one day, that carefree smile had vanished, replaced by fear and confusion. Katerina closed her eyes and allowed herself to return to the past, to the time when she was Kat Shadow Chen, when the world bowed before her name. Back then, she had power. Back then, no one dared to harm her or her family, but that power came at a price. The price was Tommy's life. She opened the desk drawer and took out an old photograph. She and Tommy after her first championship fight. He was only 19, she was 22. He held one end of her championship belt, his face glowing with pride for his sister. Kat, you're the coolest person in the world, he said that day. No one will ever be able to hurt you. But he was wrong. People found ways to cause harm that had nothing to do with physical strength. They attacked what you loved. They used the system against you. They turned your reputation into a weapon. A few days later, the situation got even worse. Katerina went to the bank to take out a loan, but she was denied, citing insufficient credit history, even though she had never had problems before. Then she tried to contact several housing agencies, but each found a reason to reject her application. I'm sorry, Mrs. Hamilton, but we cannot provide you with services at this time, said the consultant at the third agency. There was an apology in her voice, but also fear. Can I ask why? The woman nervously looked around. Listen, this is unofficial, but a call came in. Someone very influential doesn't want you to find housing in this city. I'm sorry, but I can't risk my job. Katrina left the office feeling utterly despairing. Jason was systematically cutting off all avenues of retreat. He wasn't just seeking revenge, he was methodically destroying their lives. When she picked Zoe up from school, she noticed her daughter was crying. What happened, sweetheart? Nothing, just a tough day. But Katerina saw the red mark on Zoe's wrist, hidden under her sleeve. Zoe, show me your hand. Mom, it's nothing. Show me, right now. Zoe reluctantly rolled up her sleeve, revealing red grip-shaped marks that were already starting to fade. Who did this? It doesn't matter, they said their parents warned them to stay away from me, that I could be dangerous, like my mother. When I tried to explain, one of the upperclassmen grabbed my arm and told me to shut up. Katerina felt something break inside her. It was one thing to attack her, but a completely different thing to harm her child. Who exactly did this to you? Mom, please don't. It will only make things worse. But Katerina was no longer listening. The same cold fire that once made her invincible in the octagon appeared in her eyes. That night, after Zoe fell asleep, Katerina pulled out her old laptop and began her research. Jason Sterling, it turned out, was connected to a network of influential businessmen and politicians in the city. His dojo was just a facade. The real money came from consulting services for local companies that needed problem solving. She found a pattern. Other people who crossed paths with Jason or his clients suddenly lost their jobs, became homeless, faced false accusations. The system was well-oiled and efficient, but every system has weak points, and Katerina knew something about finding weak spots. On Thursday morning, the last straw came. Zoe walked into the kitchen with a letter from school. Mom, they want you to come to a meeting with the principal. They say they've received complaints from other parents and want to discuss the situation. Katerina read the letter twice, not believing her eyes. The school referred to concerns from the parent community and the need to ensure a safe learning environment for all students. They wanted to meet to discuss Zoe's continued enrollment at the school. "This isn't fair," Zoe whispered, tears streaming down her cheeks. "I didn't do anything wrong." "I know, sweetheart. I know." Katerina hugged her daughter, feeling her own tears mix with Zoe's hair. She had failed. After all the years of trying to build a normal, peaceful life, she had failed to protect the only person that mattered. "Mom," Zoe pulled away and looked into her mother's eyes. "Maybe you should apologize to Sensei Jason. Maybe if you say you're sorry, he'll leave us alone." Katerina looked at her daughter's face, terrified, desperate, ready to accept humiliation for a chance at a normal life. And in that moment, she realized that there was nothing worse than seeing your child lose faith in justice. "No, dear, some people see apologies as a weakness. They see them as permission to cause even more harm. Then what are we going to do?" Katerina was silent for a moment, a battle raging inside her between the woman who had vowed never to fight again and the mother who needed to protect her child. "Mom, I'm going to fix something." "What do you mean?" Katerina stood up and walked to the closet. From a distant corner, she pulled out an old gym bag that she hadn't opened in 13 years. Inside were her old training gloves, worn and crumpled from countless hours of practice. "Mom, you're scaring me." "Don't be afraid, dear. For the first time in days, I know exactly what to do." Katerina took out her phone and dialed a number she had found in her research the night before. "Portland Gazette Investigative Department? This is Kat Chen. Yes, former champion. I have a story for you about corruption in our city, and I have evidence." After the call with the journalist, Katerina turned to Zoe. "Dear, there are things about my old life that I never told you. Not because I was ashamed, but because I wanted to protect you from this world." "What things?" "When I was a champion, I had connections. People who respected me, not for what I could do in the ring, but for how I behaved outside of it. Journalists, lawyers, activists. People who fight against people like Jason." Zoe sat down at the kitchen table. "Are you going back to fighting?" "No, dear. I'm going to use the only weapon that people like Jason truly fear. The truth." For the next few hours, Katerina's phone wouldn't stop ringing. Old friends she hadn't seen in years, journalists who remembered her reputation for honesty and integrity, lawyers who specialized in corruption cases. By evening, she had a team. "Kat," said David Reynolds, the investigative journalist she had worked with on charity projects in the past, "what you told me is just the tip of the iceberg. We've been tracking Sterling's network for months, but we lack someone willing to testify. Now you have someone. Do you understand what you're getting into? These people are dangerous. They will destroy you if they can." Katerina looked at Zoe, who was doing her homework at the table, and her resolve strengthened. "They're already trying to destroy me. The difference is that now I'm fighting back." The next morning, Friday, the first article was published. Local martial arts instructor linked to corruption network. The story detailed how Jason used his connections to intimidate and harass those who crossed his path. By lunchtime, the second article appeared. Former world champion exposes harassment system. An interview with Katerina, where she spoke not only about what happened to her, but also about other victims she had found. By evening, the third article was out. Documents show connections between local politicians and the intimidation network. Jason tried to fight back, but it was too late. The story gained traction on social media. Parents of students began asking questions. Sponsors of the dojo started withdrawing their support. On Saturday morning, Katerina received a call from Zoe's school principal. "Mrs. Hamilton, I must apologize. After seeing the articles in the newspaper, it became clear that we had received inaccurate information about the situation. Zoe can, of course, remain at school." "Thank you. And Mrs. Hamilton, what you did, it took courage. Many people in our community are grateful to you for speaking out." After the call, Katerina felt a huge weight lift off her shoulders. But the real test came on Monday morning when she received a call from one of the clients who had terminated their contract with her. "Katerina, this is Marcus from TechFlow. I'm calling to apologize and offer to reinstate our contract. After what we read in the newspapers, well, we realized we were misled." By the end of the month, most of her clients gradually returned. Not all. Some preferred to keep their distance, fearing possible repercussions, but enough for the family to live steadily again. Some even offered additional work as an apology. But the most important moment came on Thursday when Zoya came home from school with a broad smile. "Mom, guess what? Today Madison Pierce came up to me and apologized for being rude. She said her mom read the articles and explained to her what really happened." "That's wonderful, dear. And you know what else? Mr. Johnson, the history teacher, said that what you did was similar to what civil rights activists did. He said that sometimes you have to be ready to stand up to the system to protect what is right." Katerina felt tears welling up in her eyes. "Mr. Johnson is a wise man. Mom, I'm proud of you, not for being a champion, but for being my mom." At that moment, Katerina realized she had made the right choice. She did not return to fighting. She did not let anger or a thirst for revenge dictate her actions. Instead, she used the lessons she had learned over years of motherhood. True strength comes not from the ability to inflict harm, but from the willingness to stand up and protect what is right. As for Jason Sterling, his dojo lost a significant number of students over the next few months. Several sponsors withdrew their support. An investigation led to corruption charges against several of his associates, although Jason himself avoided serious legal consequences. He was forced to significantly reduce his operations, but not before sending Katerina one last message. "You won this round, but it's not over." Katerina deleted the message without replying. She knew there would always be people like Jason, people who use power to harm others, but she also knew there would always be people willing to stand up. For now, she had a daughter to raise, a life to build, and a community that now knew that even the quietest people can be the strongest when they protect what they love. 3 months later, Zoya passed her Greenbelt exam at a new dojo where the instructors valued discipline and respect above all. The process of finding a new training place took time. Many parents were initially wary, but gradually as the truth became known, attitudes changed. When the ceremony was over, she ran up to Katerina with a beaming smile. "Mom, did you see? I did it. I saw, dear. I'm so proud of you." Sensei Martinez said I have great technique. He asked if my mom practiced martial arts. Katerina laughed. "And what did you tell him?" "I said my mom is the strongest person I know. Not because she can fight, but because she knows when to fight and when there are better ways to solve a problem." Katerina hugged her daughter, feeling her heart swell with love and pride. Perhaps she was no longer a world champion in the ring, but she had won something far more important. She had kept her family together, protected her community, and showed her daughter that true strength comes not from fists, but from character. And as they walked home under the warm evening sun, Katerina knew she had finally found a balance between the woman she once was and the mother she had become. The shadow returned, but not as a fighter. She returned as a defender, as the voice of those who could not speak for themselves, as a living proof that the strongest battles are won not in the ring, but in the hearts and minds of those who refuse to remain silent in the face of injustice.